I'm not sure how to kick this off. I've avidly read No Sleep for some time. I love the stories, the way you guys can take your worst nightmares, fears, thoughts, and pain, then turn all the dark matter into incredible storytelling. I lack such talent, so please bear with me. For so long, I was content to simply observe and use this subreddit as mere entertainment. Apologies. And then, not too long ago, something awoke a memory long dormant, revived an itch I thought I itched away, so I need to spill, download. Someone wrote something here, and then I remembered not just stories, but some memories as well. So vivid, pungent, in fact, like a sweet, sickly smell, rotting memories, leaves, and flesh. The story that a fellow Redditor wrote was about Djinn. Some of you may know something about the legend. My family's from India, and so I've always known about them. The story goes, God, Allah, call it what you will, made us out of clay, and he made Jinn out of fire. Demons. Demons may be the closest approximation. The Jinn exist in a parallel universe, but they can and do cross over time to time. Strange things can happen when they do. Growing up in a large family, I heard many stories about these creatures, and I'd like to share a few with you if I may. Not only that, but I have a few stories to tell that I can't explain, but I think they all involve the Jinn. And again, I'd like to throw one or two into the mix. One final thing. These stories belong to a world that's older than us, a world that's rich in stories, culture, and learning. In a world where people like me are defined by the acts of murderers and terrorists, this is the real deal. As for the murdering scums, the Jinn will deal with them. This is a legendary story in our family, and so many of my relatives have recounted this tale to me in very similar form. Hearing the very real fear in their voices, it still scares the shit out of me. It was 1935. India was under British rule, but the combined pressures of the post-World War I era and an energized resistance movement led by Gandhi meant this place was caught between time, between modernity and antiquity, between an ancient set of beliefs and the new, ruthless, mechanized reality. Sometimes, the ancient world sipped through the cracks in the newly set concrete and threw everything out of kilter. My great-grand-uncle, Inam, worked for the Indian Civil Service, an administrator in the vast machinery of British rule. He traveled from city to town to village to hamlet, ensuring the great machine kept taking over. As a bureaucratic nomad, he stayed in government accommodation. Recent travelers to India may have come across the dak bungalows, pre-World War II housing randomly scattered across the country. Fairly anonymous, discreet houses for the anonymous, discreet functionaries oiling the wheels of empire. My uncle was in the northeastern region of India, and after a particularly tedious audit of local government expenditure, he found himself needing a place to stay. It was after dark, and it was unwise to travel given the mix of political adversaries, criminals, and tribes in the region. He was advised to find lodgings, and he unsurprisingly agreed. Now, in this town, there wasn't much accommodation going spare. The one hotel was packed with local sepoys, soldiers suppressing an uprising by impoverished landowners. The elder's house was packed to the brim, owing to a family wedding. That left the guest house or dak bungalow. Normally, these properties would be the first choice for travelers, but this one never happened. It had a grim reputation. It was a bad place. No one stayed there. But my great-grand-uncle was a rational man. There was no evidence to prove that this house was unsafe in any way, save for some rambling local hearsay, and he wasn't one for ill-informed gossip. It had a roof, walls, and a bed, so it would do. The housekeeper even lit a fire and cooked him a small, modest meal before scuttling off to his own home on the outskirts of town. He insisted he would stay and help, but only before it got dark. Then he had to go. Well fed and watered, my great-granduncle read a little before beginning to doze off in the dying light of a small kerosene lamp. All was quiet, save for the odd stray dog, the bleating of a distant goat, and the incessant yet familiar buzz of far less distant mosquitoes. Ensconced in his net, he drifted off as he considered another day of tedious yet essential bureaucracy. A couple hours later, well before dawn, he awoke. Now, all the accounts I've heard from various relatives say the same thing. Firstly, there was a sickly smell in the air, a fetid, rotting sensation that he could almost taste. Secondly, a deep, rasping, asthmatic breathing that came ever closer, and as it got closer, it sounded yet more deathly. My illustrious relative was a proud man, and by all accounts no coward. He sat up in his bed and pulled away the mosquito net. He probably and reasonably felt it was a common thief. He drew his service-issue revolver and waited. The smell grew more fetid, the breathing more repulsive, the air turned sour like stale milk, and then it appeared. I've heard this story so many times, and yet it still sends shivers down my spine. Out of darkness, through the doors, stepped in a very tall man. He was so tall, he was almost stick-like, with very long, spidery arms and legs. He was dressed in a kurta pajama, a traditional middle-class outfit of the time, still prevalent today, but while such outfits are usually white, this was a deep black. As Inam described it, not just black, but an absence of light. The creature wore a haunted look, wide-open eyes staring intently at Inam. He was almost yellow, jaundiced, cancerous, and sick beyond his mortal coil. He didn't blink, and steadily glided forward, as if he were on rails. He was completely silent as he loomed larger and larger. There's another thing. He kept muttering under his breath. It was apparently in Urdu. According to Inam, he was saying the following phrase repeatedly. "You will hurt like I hurt. You will burn like I burn." Not only that, between those sentences, he was spitting, almost mechanically, but in such a malevolent, spiteful way. My great-granduncle knew something was very wrong, and he decided to get out of there as fast as he could. Despite his military training, he said later he simply dropped his revolver knowing it would do no good whatsoever. He ran to the police station, and once in, he was greeted with a mixture of mild concern, relief, and even a little amusement. He didn't bother telling them the story. He told my grandfather years later that they knew precisely what had happened, and he knew there was nothing they could do. He left at dawn on his horse and made a note never to come back. On the way out, he passed a small village, a settlement really. Just a few mud huts, small pond, and some impoverished locals. As he passed a banyan tree, his eyes followed the tangled roots up to the canopy. The leaves started rustling, and while it might have been the wind, he also noticed a sweet, sickly smell drift towards him. He urged his horse to go faster and didn't look back. As he sped forward, he heard a sickly, anemic cough fading into the distance.